everyone, welcome back to my channel. I have tried to film this video 7 times and each time I've been interrupted by a new lawnmower. So if there's a lawnmower happening in the back of this video, I have the sincerest apologies, okay, to give to you, but I cannot sit around and wait anymore. I have to film this video. So lawnmowers or not, we're doing it. In today's video, I want to talk about the 5 best pet frogs, or what I think the 5 best pet frogs are. Now, if your frog doesn't appear on this list, or a frog that you want doesn't appear on this list, that doesn't mean that it's a bad pet frog, it just means that I haven't personally experienced keeping that frog. So before we get started, I ask that you please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and away we go. There is no rhyme or reason to this list, it's not in any particular order, but here we go. So number 1 is the fire-bellied toad. It isn't actually a toad, it's a frog. It just has a bunch of bumps on its skin so it looks like a toad, but is actually classified as a frog. The reason I like fire-bellied toads is because they're super energetic, they're a diurnal species so you get to see them during the day. They're also sociable and interactive with other frogs of their same species. In fact, fire-bellied toads do better when they're housed with others of the same species. They're a very social frog and do better in groups. So one downside maybe is if you were looking to have just one frog, this species isn't going to cut it for you. You should probably have more than one. But if you were looking to have more than one, then the fire-bellied toad is a great option. Like I said, they're very interactive with each other and with you. Not so much in the way of handling, but in the way of like you watching them in their enclosure. Most amphibians are not great for handling simply because they are amphibians and they breathe through their skin. So if you have any oils, fragrance, perfumes, detergents, soaps, anything like that on your hand, it's going to affect them. It's going to leach into their skin and that is going to harm them, and of course you don't want that. So I wouldn't recommend handling amphibians on a regular basis anyway, but fire-bellied toads in particular are not so great for handling because 1, they're very small and jumpy, and 2, they exude a toxin from their skins that if you have like a small cut on your hand, it might irritate that. It's not going to cause any issues on you otherwise. Another thing I like about them is that you can build really cool enclosures for them. So you can go the simplistic route and just have like a little like floating island rock and a bunch of water and some fake plants. You can do that. Or you can build a live planted bioactive polydarium and go that route. And either way, you can have success with keeping frogs like that. So I think it's really great because you can go all out if you want to. Now, the second frog I have on this list is the White's tree frog. The White's tree frog is much larger than the fire-bellied toad. They're also not aquatic, so they do have to have a water bowl in their enclosure, but for the most part, they hang out above the floor. So like, you know, because they're tree frogs, they hang out in the trees. The thing I like about White's tree frogs is that they are so goofy. They have so much character. They're really big and funny looking. They jump really far, and if you're going to handle an amphibian, they're more easy to handle than a fire-bellied toad. The thing that makes White's tree frogs a not so great pet, perhaps, would be that they require a very large enclosure, often larger than what you see people giving them. A lot of places will say an 18-18-24 is good for a pair, but I have seen my White's tree frogs jump clear across my pet room from one end to the other, and so if you're keeping them in an enclosure that is only 18 inches deep and 18 inches wide, that's not really giving them that much room. So I always recommend bigger for a White's tree frog, and in fact I have mine housed in a 90-gallon enclosure that is 48 by 18 by 24, and I could even go bigger than that and they would use every square inch. Like, they're a very active frog. So you might not be looking to have such a large enclosure, and that's okay. This might be not the species for you then. Another thing that makes them maybe not the best species to keep as a pet would be that they are prone to health issues. So all amphibians are prone to health issues, especially when it comes to like a dirty enclosure. Then they can get a bacterial infection or they can have parasites. But I feel like from what I've seen in the community and what I've experienced myself, White's tree frogs can be a bit of a challenge. Like, I've had mystery health illness with 2 of my White's tree frogs. I've had friends who have had their White's tree frogs have multiple illnesses or even pass away. They are tricky. So a lot of people list them as a beginner frog, and I think that like they could be if you get lucky and don't have any problems. I don't want to put you off from having White's tree frogs because they're definitely worth it. I love my White's tree frogs, even though the headache they caused me last year, but it doesn't matter. I love them. So if you are interested in White's tree frogs, I just wanted to have you keep that in mind, because if you're new to frogs, like you've never worked with frogs before, maybe try something different at first. And then this could be a pro or a con to you, but white tree frogs are like sociable. A lot of people keep them in groups. I personally keep 4 of mine together with no issues. Some people will keep them alone, but I think it's recommended to keep them together like in pairs or larger. So it's just something to keep in mind that you might not want to have multiple frogs, and white tree frogs do better with multiples. So if you only want 1 frog, then the next species we're going to talk about is perfect. Because now we're talking about the chubby frog. The chubby frog is a very funny and cute looking banded bullfrog. They have these like kind of longer limbs and like really round bodies. They are a delight, honestly. I have one, her name is Chocho. She's actually down here. You can't see her enclosure. Of course, I'll show it on the screen though so you can see it. But Chocho is a great frog, and a lot of chubby frogs make really good pets because they're simple, they're easy. They don't need a whole lot of space, although you could make a more elaborate enclosure, and I recommend trying that after having them for a while. But they just need dirt, a water bowl, and food, essentially. Like, they're pretty easy as far as amphibians go. Like I was saying, they can be housed alone, so if you were looking for a frog that doesn't need to be housed with other frogs, a chubby frog is the way to go. I have seen some people cohab their chubby frogs, however, I haven't seen that they're a very social species, and I definitely don't see people housing males together. If you were going to cohab chubby frogs, I recommend cohabbing females. The next frog I'm going to mention is quite similar, however, in my experience, a bit grumpier than the chubby frog. So this is the tomato frog. So like the chubby frog, a tomato frog is pretty simplistic in its needs. It needs a water dish, it needs substrate, and it needs food. And that's pretty much it. However, I don't want you to just think when it comes to tomato frogs and chubby frogs, you don't have to put in any effort because they are a living creature and you do have to put in effort. You just don't have to put in as much as you would with a white tree frog, which needs a lot of space, or a fire-bellied toad, which needs a lot of space, but that's also aquatic, so you need to be good at keeping up with the water changes and stuff. What I like about tomato frogs is the simplicity of keeping them. Also, they're very grumpy little red faces. I would say if you're interested in tomato frogs to keep in mind that in addition to being bad to handle because they're an amphibian, they can secrete this really sticky substance from their skin, and it's a little bit of a challenge to get off once you get it on your fingers. You have to like scrub it off. So if that doesn't sound like something you'd be interested in, I would pass. The last frog I have on here is a bit different than the rest as it is a fully aquatic frog. So as fire-bellied toads are semi-aquatic, white tree frogs, chubby frogs, and tomato frogs are all terrestrial, the African dwarf frog, which is the frog we're covering now, is fully aquatic. It's a very small frog and again can be kept in groups, which is great because they have really great interactions and can be very fun to watch. You can train them to eat from your hand, or you can train them like when it's dinner time. When I had African dwarf frogs, I would tap the glass and they would, you know, trace the sound all the way to where my finger was, and that's where the food was, and they would eat it. It was a lot of fun. They also make this really cool sound underwater. I don't have a clip of it, but it's like the coolest sound. It almost sounds like electric humming, but they're making it like, and you can kind of hear it through the water. Like I used to have them in my bedroom, and I would literally be in my bed and they'd be all the way the other end of the room and I could still hear them. So the thing about frogs is they make noise. The loudest frogs are going to be the white tree frogs. The quietest are going to be these guys because they're underwater. The downside to African dwarf frogs would be that they are fully aquatic, and that means you cannot handle them whatsoever, and also that they require decent water parameters, and you need to know how to cycle a tank. You need to know how to do water changes. That can be kind of a headache. But another cool thing is that you can have a community tank. So if you're used to fish tanks, or if you want to get into fish tanks and you want to have a frog as well, you can have African dwarf frogs housed with like more peaceful schooling fish like a guppy or a platy. So those are the 5 best pet frogs that I recommend. If you think I left one off here, it's probably just because I haven't kept it. I did leave Pac-Man frog off here because I've never kept a Pac-Man frog, but I also know a lot of people have like sudden death in their Pac-Man frogs, and so I couldn't recommend them for that reason. I don't want to set you guys up for failure of getting a pet frog and then having it die just a few months later. So I did not include them. I've also never had a pixie frog, but I think that they'd make really cool pets. I've never had an American bullfrog, but I know they require a really large setup, but they can be cool pets if you do it right. There's tons and tons of frogs, and I just haven't had all of them, so I can't say, other than these 5, what I think the best are. Like, for example, I would love to have mossy tree frogs someday. Mossy tree frogs and a pixie frog are on my list, like when I move out and have more space. They're an absolute yes. An American bullfrog is a yes tentatively. I have to make sure I have the right type of setup for it. But yeah, I love frogs. Frogs are incredible pets, and if you find yourself fortunate to be able to have more than just one of the species I mentioned on this list, then I think that's really great because they're awesome pets. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, let me know by leaving a like and a comment. Also, please subscribe, hit that notification bell. And with all that said, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!